All right, looks like we started. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sierra, and I am the Stakeholder Engagement and Artist Coordinator at Eastside Arts Society. And today I'm going to be moderating our third and final Talking Art panel. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that we are holding this event on the traditional unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am truly grateful to gather on these lands and waters, and I intend to work from a place of respect and responsibility to this gift. For those of you who are new, Talking Art is a three-part artist talk series that Eastside Art Society presents in advance of the Eastside Culture Crawl. It's a great opportunity to get to learn more about the artists and their process. The theme of today's talk is world building and storytelling through visual art. During our discussions, we will be exploring the power of art to reshape perceptions and create new worlds. Together, our panel of artists will unpack the diverse ways that visual arts inspires imagination, connection, and sense of belonging. For our discussion today, I will be asking each artist 3 different questions. And if you have any questions of your own during this chat, please put them in the Q&A box for a question period at the end of the conversation. I am very excited to introduce to you today 3 artists who are going to help us explore this topic. First, we have with us Aimée Henny Brown. Aimée's artistic practice engages analog collage and printed matter to question the historical content within contemporary art. Her collages, drawings, performances, and bookworks have been presented nationally and internationally with group shows in Germany, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and solo exhibitions across Canada. She has attended numerous artist residencies in North America and the EU, and is represented by the Vancouver Art Gallery Art Rental and Sales Program and Ian Tan's online art gallery, OAG. Aimée is an assistant professor in visual arts with the University of Fraser Valley. Next, I would like to present Jaime and Religato Studio. I hope I said that right. Jaime founded the studio in Vancouver, BC, and it's a space for exploring contrasts such as micro and macro, ephemeral and eternal, through various mediums like classical animation, woodworking, and ceramics. The studio fosters creativity and community, and Jaime's work balances control with randomness, allowing for non-conscious influences to shape his art. The studio also reflects on themes from his animated short, Regato, and his wordless book, Ubaratutu, which explores the precious and fleeting nature of existence. The studio offers workshops and collaborative projects blending traditional techniques with modern artistic concepts. Finally, we have Kari Kristensen with us today. Kari was born in a small town in Ontario, but has spent the majority of her adult life here in British Columbia, among the mountains. They figure prominently in her work, a beacon and touchstone of home. Canada has a rich history of landscape painting, and from a young age, Kristensen studied and wanted to contribute to the pictorial history. As a printmaker, primarily she expresses herself through line and thousands of tiny dots carved in the surface of linoleum prior to printing by hand onto paper. What is at first glance a series of black and white lines further unravels in itself the longer you spend looking at the work, revealing infinite detail and building in an exaltation of landscape. It's this carefully honed technique and the respect of the natural world that Kristensen brings to her mural work as well. So to start off our conversation, I would love to hear from each of our artists to sharing a bit more about their creative process. Aimée, I would love to start with you, and I'm wondering if you'd be able to introduce to our audience a little bit more about your body of work and creative process.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us here today, and also just what a joy and an honor it is to be in such great company with our other artists as well. So one of the ways that I consider my practice is that I'm a what I would call a transdisciplinary artist who is project-based. And what I mean by that is that I work across many mediums. I tend to work in series, so I'm exploring an idea that allows me to dig deeply and to work through specific research topics. And what I've done with the images for this kind of intro is I've just given some highlights for this moment. So we can look at a few things that have happened across the last 8 to 10 years. I do the work that I do by activating different kinds of printed matter and objects, and I work in flat, spatial, and then time-sensitive ways. So flat meaning like 2D work, traditional ideas related to collage, spatial meaning like installations, objects, things that occupy literal space. And then I also work with time. So some of the work that I've been able to share widely has been more video-based or a sound-based, time-based work. A lot of the work that I do in terms of where I find my images and how I sort through them has to do with my relationship with archives. I work with a lot of found items and historical documents and a lot of photo-based media that you can find in publications. And so I investigate this material, you could say printed matter, through a methodology of repair and reuse. And I think a lot of the time we might just call that collage. The approach that I'm taking with repair, reuse, and collage, I find it encourages a kind of transitional space where those functional objects, those books, those things that I'm bringing into studio, they become kind of reclaimed materials, and my process allows them to shift from their initial purpose and their initial intended capacity. The new configurations that you're seeing, so the collages, the artworks, I make these works with the intention of thinking about both our history, but also possible futures, and how we kind of reconcile with objects as like tangible, holdable, real things in a kind of virtual era that we live in. And I think this is interesting for me because I work in both like very, very analog, literal cut and paste, and then also very digital ways to create the work in sort of different modes, to distribute it widely, to make book objects, to make video projection. And one of the fundamental questions that I think is really guiding me, it kind of acts as a beacon throughout my practice, is also thinking about this kind of stretching between the everyday and the spectacular, the printed matter and the ephemeral. How are we going to survive this moment? And what could our coming times look like? And that feels like a really pertinent question over much of my work. I'm also choosing collage because I really believe in it as an anti-colonial way of making. It allows me to challenge recorded histories, investigate ideas of truth or truthiness, and then really re-envision what are familial materials. And then I think this kind of results in the work being kind of wistful and also futuristic. The work enters into a space when it's finished where it's sort of like a neoscape, a relationship to landscape or domestic scape, but something different. And this is where the connection I find to new worlds or world building really comes about. And it's through these composite sites, they're recognizable elements. We can recognize moments within them or patterns that seem familiar to us, but they also, because of that, like recognition or visual language of like, do I know that? Do I not know that? I hope that they become immersive and kind of an invitation to unfamiliar places, ideas of new ruins, and um, something that I've been working with is within world building is this idea of possible futures.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you, Amy. I love the concept of world building because, I mean, it's something you hear so much in storytelling and in books, but transitioning that to art and also connecting it to this idea of research. I think imagination and research, I think people see those as very separate things. One is seen as very scientific and one is feels very fluffy. But in
Mm.
fact, that these two are actually, imagination is a form of research.
Oh, for sure. We play seriously here.
Exactly, exactly. And you learn so much. I think conducting research in an artistic form gives you it's somewhat boundless in
Mm,
what you can do. I loved hearing about that, reading your write-up about that. I thought it was just such an interesting approach.
thank you.
Um, Jaime, I would love to hear from you. Could you tell us a little bit more about your body of work and your creative process?
Yes, for sure. So yeah, same. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm honored to be also in very good company. Really, really good work, by the way, Amy. That was really cool. Um, yeah, when you asked about the body of work, I kind of panicked because like, how am I going to show body of work in 5 minutes? So I prepare a little video that is like about 1 minute where I just kind of ran through my Instagram page because it's funny. It's like a little timeline. Pretty much, I start at the bottom, and that's literally the very beginning. So if you could showcase that first video, and I can talk over it. Um, so I play with very expressionistic, anthropomorphic figurines that tell sometimes little stories, sometimes the stories are longer. It's mostly an exploration of illustration and animation. And you can tell that I pretty much just have fun with it. Most of the stuff that comes out of what I do, at the end of the day, it's just like, oh, that was nice. And I had lots of fun with it. Sometimes it ends up evolving into a story with a deeper meaning, but that's something that kind of happens in the process. I don't come with a premeditated idea, okay, right now I'm about to tell a story that means this. It's more like the playfulness takes me somewhere. These guys, that guy's called a blinker. I was trying to find different ways of those little guys. How can you blink in different ways? So it was just a series of blinkers, and in which each one of those guys is blinking differently. That's the art of my last book, Ubaratutu, which I'll be talking about later. I'm all over the place. I work in illustration animation, but I also do stained glass. I work with wood. I work with metal. That's one of the latest illustrations called Home. And with the time that I have remaining, I would love to share a 3-minute animation, which is the genesis of my style. That I needed to tell a story in 3 minutes, and I did a style that was easy to showcase. So I'm gonna start. I'm gonna show you that animated short, and with that, I'll stop talking. Right. Thank you so much. I'll stop there. I think that's 5 minutes, but thank you for watching that, and to be continued.
That was fantastic. I was feeling there was so much tension watching that, and then the different perspective changes. I too feel like I was like holding on for dear life, about to fall. Um, anyway, we'll come back to you. Kari, I would love to hear from you. Could you share for us a little bit about your body of work and creative process?
No.
Oh,
That's a pretty
shucks.
hard act to follow. That video is pretty funny.
It's
I don't know if
pretty
it's
good.
supposed to be funny, but it was definitely funny. Okay. First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone out there watching, and thank you for tuning in. I know there's somebody from Australia watching, so shout out Australia. Okay, if we could put my first slide up. Okay, I am first and foremost a printmaker. For the last 5 years, my focus has been solely exploring and creating linoleum prints. If you're unfamiliar with the terminology, slide 2, linoleum printing, can you flip the slide? There we go. Linoleum printing is a form of relief printmaking in which the matrix, in my case, it's battleship linoleum, is carved into. The area to be printed is higher than the non-printed area that I've carved away, and ink is applied to the higher surface, and that transfers to the paper. Slide number 3. Either by hand or with the use of an etching press. Ruh-roh.
Okay, 1 second. Kari, do you want to keep going?
Yep.
Steph will put up the slide.
It's a video, actually, that one.
Oh, it's a video. That will take us a moment. Okay, perfect. Here we go. We're back.
Okay. The technical things of printmaking. Here we go. That's me using the etching press after carving it out of linoleum. Okay, so woohoo! If it works out well, we rejoice. We do a small little print dance and thank the print gods. We could switch to the next slide. Okay, so that's the methodology. It's a very, very physical practice, from the sanding of the lino to the careful carving of it, rolling out the ink. I have one 2-handled brayer that's over 5 pounds alone. And lastly, cranking it through the etching press, it all gets a little sweaty. To quote the art historian Jennifer Roberts, print is a contact event. As a printmaker, I'm not generally utilizing print for its replicative function at this point. Printmaking has been prized and perhaps even overshadowed for its ability to have a repeatable matrix. I approach it kind of like a painter does a canvas or a piece of paper. For me, it's a tool of communication and it's a singular event. Now to touch briefly on theme. My artistic heroes growing up were all Canadian. This probably is no big surprise if anyone is familiar with my work. Greg Curnow, Joyce Wieland, Ken Danby, the Group of Seven, Clark McDougall. And it's not just that they were Canadian, they were also local, and their work spoke to my local environs where I grew up in Ontario. So I've always had this desire to add to a local legacy. To quote the Dead Poets Society, the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. For me, the verse is landscape. And more often, that landscape comes from within rather than from an external referent. Slide number 5. 6 years ago is when I first dipped my toe into murals. They were always intended to serve as a funnel to the print work, and they're designed to mimic it as close as possible. This one here is a mural I did on 4th Avenue for Jaguar, a 95-foot long one. And lastly, slide number 6. This one is an indoor mural that I did in a home in Vancouver. So this weekend I start painting mural number 36. So something that started out as a funnel to the print work, as a way of bringing awareness to my work in general. I think it's safe to say that it's taken on a bit of a life of its own at this point.
Definitely. Oh, wow. So interesting to hear about your approach to printmaking. So different from many artists I've spoken with in the past. And I really feel like we can see your heroes in your work. And thank you for quoting the Dead Poets Society. I feel like you can't get away from a great quote is a great quote, and I always personally love to hear it. Next, I thought we could dive a little bit further into your chosen artistic mediums and how that supports your storytelling. Aimée, could we start with you? Could you share with us a little bit about how you explore the concept of world building using collage? I know you touched on it a bit at the intro, but if you could give us a little bit more of an in-depth on your process.
For sure. I guess, and again, with these images, we can just kind of scroll through them slowly, and I'll kind of talk over and pull out some moments as I see the images pop up as well. I thought it might be interesting to speak a little bit about the technical work of what's happening here. So how am I building these worlds technically? But then to also kind of talk about some of the overarching concepts that I'm working with that are directly related to the research that I do around world building. And so from a technical level, a lot of these collages that I'm making are about kind of looking at things that are very fundamental to all of our art practices. So things like color theory, looking at edge and form and shape and seeing how we can create illusion or the idea of space through some of the images, and how these components that I'm looking at can be cut or remixed or sliced or asked to perform to kind of their utmost ability. I'm thinking about like how I can get these collages to make their own rules. So they kind of have a sense of internal gravity, a kind of center, a force that holds them together. And this allows the compositions to have like a really dynamic silhouette. So on a fundamental level, I'm really thinking about those formal qualities. And then thinking also about just the physical layering of images. So a lot of my collages, like this is a good one, for example, have over 50 cut components. And so it's a matter of not just chance in terms of like what I'm looking at, what I'm finding, but also creating almost like a mental Rolodex. I'm going to throw a really analog reference in there for people, or just like a kind of catalog that I'm flipping through of things that I have seen or things that I am looking to see. I'm really dedicated to the fact that the world building that I take on in my practice is not just about 2D elements, it's also 3D. So I also make miniatures. This is what you see before you. And something that I'm interested in both in the 2D work and the 3D work is how to make the 2D work really, really big and how to make the 3D work at times very, very small. And I think this helps us create something that's immersive, and it also helps to cultivate a sense of narrative when people can start to imagine themselves inside these spaces or try to figure out how the collages are functioning. And a lot of this decision making, when I'm thinking about this on a conceptual level, is really coming back to ideas of transrealism. So transrealism is maybe more familiar to folks if they're interested in the literary world around us. It's a literary movement that Margaret Atwood is a really amazing contributor towards. J.G. Ballard is also a mainstay. And there's a whole host of authors who are kind of leaning on the edge of science fiction. And they're taking the familiar and making it unfamiliar. And I think that's really the foundational principle that I work with in world building when I'm thinking about collage as a methodology or a strategy. How do I ask these components to cooperate in a way that creates illusion, that creates narrative, that's immersive, but that it also still maintains a sense of sort of jarring uncomfortability? Some of that's about strategizing really unusual organizations of images, so really long, tall images. And these mimic a lot of the landscape work that you can see in Korean and Chinese landscape scrolls that are vertically oriented as well. There's the ability to see underneath, through, and over top these landscapes all at the same time. And I'm really interested in reading the image in that way so that it forces you to kind of perform almost like a film script. So you're thinking about the idea of like scrolling through an image. the image is not moving, but your body, your eye, and your mind are. And so those are some of the strategies that I think might help folks to kind of get a little glimpse into how I'm thinking both technically and conceptually.
Amazing. That was super informative, and thank you so much. And again, another Canadian icon drop, Margaret Atwood. I was a bit curious about when you're approaching creating a work that is building this new world. When you're going into that, are you going in with an idea of what kind of world you want to be making before you start with the piece, or do you find the world it unfolds as you're making the work?
I love this question because it lets me talk about process. I think for me, I am so dedicated to process. I think outcome is a thing that happens, but I don't go into the work most of the time thinking this is what it will look like and then executing it. I think part of what I'm trying to build is a kind of kinship where I'm not going in with a sense of mastery, where I'm not going in with a sense of all knowing, or I think a lot of the time we can talk about this in art history as a kind of like precognitive genius. And to be honest, I just don't believe in that. I really believe in the ability for artists to find kinship with their material and with their process and let the process have a voice in it too.
Oh, thank you so much. I really love this idea of serious play. I feel like that's kind of coming back to me when you're saying that, and I think it's such a great way to engage.
Yeah.
Jaime, I'm going to come back to you. We've been hinted at this amazing story, this amazing book you've been working on, and I would love for you to share it with us and walk us through it.
Don't build it up too much. Yeah, well, this one is super fun because I was biking on Union Street and I saw this crow on the top of the tree and I saw him like super proud and just crowing and it made me think about, well, first of all, I felt compassion for it. That was a feeling that I was not expecting. I felt compassion for the crow. And it made me think about, okay, what is that this crow is giving him this sort of status and this posture that I felt that there was something there and I wanted to tell a story that involved a crow. And that's how the story of Ubaratutu was born. So before I go any further, I think I'm going to start with that. I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to run you through the story. The book, I wanted to show you the book like this, but you know, the quality of the video might not be great for the story to, you know, to read very well. But just so you know, it's a physical book. It comes like that in that little box. It opens like this. Sorry, see, this is why I'm not going to tell the story like this, but just so you know that there's a little design behind where the shape does matter, the size matters. I did know that I only had 32 pages and the format was this before I knew what was the story that I was going to tell. So I liked imposing limitations on what I'm going to work on and then take it from there. And I wasn't sure what the story was going to be. So once again, it was process, 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 and then the story revealed itself at the end. So let's share the screen. Right. View full screen. Okay. We don't need that. Well, you know what? Maybe this first page is to show you that at the end, I decided to play with cuneiform and with art that was well, back from the Sumerians, because the name of the book that came later, once the book was done, I named it Ubaratutu. I'll tell you later why I named it Ubaratutu, but Ubaratutu was a king, a Sumerian king. We don't know if he actually existed. He's mythological, but he was the last king of Sumer right before the Great Flood. That's exactly what it says right here. It's the beginning of the book, and all it says is Ubaratutu of Shuruppak was the last antediluvian king of Sumer. And I wrote it also in cuneiform because it looked cool. So I put it in cuneiform, I put it in French, I put it in Spanish. I'm Colombian, by the way, and I was in Canada. So, all right, French, Spanish, English, cuneiform. That's how the book starts. And the story begins with a crow finding a little shiny object. That's a very dramatic zoom in into that crow diving into the sea and getting that shiny object out of the water. Crow is happy with his pearl. Shiny object is too long to say. I'm gonna call it pearl. As it happens in life, a bigger bird snatches the pearl from the little bird. Moment of tension between the two birds. An even bigger bird snatches the pearl from the medium bird. Now this big guy has the pearl. And then an even bigger bird snatches the pearl. An owl. And these two guys are pissed. So they decide to attack the owl, and the owl is like, come at me, bro. They get electrocuted in the power lines. And the three big monsters fall down. Little guy from the beginning still alive. He goes for his prized possession. He gets shot. By who? Why? So this whole fight, we're zooming out, and this whole fight messed up the power lines of this little shed. The guy was just waiting for that fourth bird to show up and killed it. You see the guy repairing the power line of his little shed. The pearl inside lighting up the house. Big tsunami comes and washes everything away. There you see the little guy trying to save the pearl at the end. And at the end, we got the pearl, but it's more like a celestial pearl. The pearl is in the sky. And that's the end of the story. And I wanted to just play with that, with the history, with the story of the micro versus the macro. Going back to the idea of, I'm gonna stop sharing screen so I can talk to the camera. Going back to the idea of when I saw that crow at the beginning, I wanted to, it did come to me, well, what happens if a bunch of birds start to fight and they piss off the neighbor, and the neighbor just shoots to the king of the crows? You know, like I was like, the crow is so insignificant. And then I brought it to me. We're so insignificant. Like zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. What happens if I just keep playing with our tiny little dramas that seem so big, and then you have this celestial huge objects in the sky that are right in front of our faces, and we just ignore it all the time. We're just not paying attention to the sun, to the moon, to the stars, to the fact that there's like a big black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. So I wanted to play with that. How can I make a tiny story mean a lot for 90% of the book, and then zoom out, and all of a sudden is very tiny. It's precious, but it's very tiny. And Ubaratutu, well, I just wanted to give the name of the book, the name of somebody who thinks it's the center of the universe before nature shows them who's the real boss. So there you go. That's the little book that I wanted to share, and the storytelling that came through exploring with those shapes and characters.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through that. I definitely think it does really showcase for us how our small interactions to us feel so big. They feel so larger than life. But when you do zoom out, really, yeah, we are tiny. We're a lot smaller than that black hole that you just mentioned in the scheme of things. And I really loved walking through the book page by page, because it really made me think about your process and how you said you didn't know where the story was going, but page by page, you were creating it. That's what it sounded like. So for us, page by page, I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then slowly but surely, that the story unfolded. And I think that's such a magical experience. And I think everyone should stop by your studio at the Crawl, and hopefully get to see the book in person, because I think it sounds like that's a really great experience on its own.
Thank you.
Moving on to Kari, and going to discuss your mural. I would love to learn more about the Guardians and how you incorporated elements of nature to tell the story of the community and how you went about this.
For sure. I thought it'd be interesting to look at the creation of this one mural because I did take a different approach to this one than I have any of the other ones. Yeah, we pop up the first slide there. Approaching the design of a mural in general, it usually speaks to the vision and the desire of the client. Often, I mean, they're hiring me because they appreciate my aesthetic and they're usually willing to let me choose the design. So typically I've used pre-existing original prints, which means together we go through the roster of what I have available and I present them digital renderings. That's what you're seeing in this slide here, because it helps a client often if they can see what a design might look like in their space. So this one is for Microsoft in Seattle. It's on the left-hand side there is like just the elevation showing what it might look in space. And then on the right there is it's also just a digital rendering showing, again, with all the furniture around it, what it might look like when it's finished. If we could pop to the next slide. As I said earlier, like the whole point of me doing murals was to funnel people to the print work and to make them more curious about printmaking. So this slide actually is a side-by-side of the finished mural on the right, and that on the left is the original print. So like my biggest desire is to try and make them as close as possible. So like the client kind of knows what they're getting. When you get there, sometimes things work out a little bit different with lighting and stuff, but for the most part, I can make it look pretty close to what I've presented the client. But next slide. The Guardians project was a little bit different. I mean, the client was different. The passion for their business. I mean, a lot of people have passion for their business, but these guys, it's incredible. They had a unique vision, and it was obvious from the moment that I met them. Everything that they do is so well thought out and well planned out, and they wanted that kind of approach to their mural as well. From the beginning, they knew that they wanted the restaurant and the menu and everything to reach out to the surrounding community. So I went out for a site visit, and which I don't often do because you don't really need to, but I felt like I should for this one, and I was thankful that I did because this building has some curious architecture if you want to paint on it. It's got a 20-foot peaked roof that cascades down 40 feet wide, and then it wraps around 8 more feet around the side, and then it goes to the back side where it soars back up to another 20 feet. So it's 2 40-foot murals in a continuous scene that wrap around the building. So instantly when I saw it, I knew nothing that I had would work. And being there kind of initiated this desire to have like something special that would speak specifically to the architecture of the building. Yeah, so I went back to the studio. We could pop up the next slide. And instead of sending like digital recreations to them, I sent them sketches, which I almost never do. But these were I think this was the second or third set of sketches that I sent to the client, and they approved these ones. So I went back to the studio and I created original lino prints for them. If we could flip to the next slide. And that's what I'm showing you here. So I had the sketch, I got the sketch approved, and then I went back and made the lino, which is usually, it's like the opposite of what I would generally do. So the front, I really wanted to be that attention getter, like the showboat. The front is the one that's on the left-hand side, reaching tall, like kind of almost watching over the parking lot. So when you pull up to this place, you can't miss the 20-foot mountain soaring over you. Technically, the front side of the building was incredibly challenging to paint because there's 5 different facades that recede from each other and wrap around. So trying to get line work to match up from more than one viewpoint was really challenging. At one point, I crawled up into a little hole where just birds have previously lived and had to paint in there. It's not very nice in there. Okay, pop up the next slide. I'd say like the question that I get asked most often is how I get the design onto the wall, because people see it in a small print version and they're wondering, how do you make it so it's so big and still makes sense? Well, first I'd like to say fear. Every single time I get to a wall, I think, oh, good Lord, what have I done to myself? How am I supposed to do this? And fear is a fantastic motivator. Second, I'd say math. There's lots of math, grids, usually measuring, and a digital level sure helps. It's then that I move on to the actual painting part. there's tape, a lot of tape, and that's what you're seeing in this slide here. I use it to make a stencil, and then it's spray painted over later. I think the next one is a video. If we could flip to that one. Anyway, so yes, if I could get some tape sponsorship, that would be great. I typically go through, like a mural this size, I go through about 40 rolls of tape as I'm doing it. Oh, look, there I go. If only it was actually that fast in real life. But yeah, so yeah, just an elaborate stencil put up on the wall. So technically still printmaking, and then spray painted completely over. And then the most satisfying part of all, of course, is when you remove the tape at the end and you're left with your line work. Awesome. Yeah, if you catch up a little bit on that slide there, there's actually writing on the wall as well, which we had to incorporate as well for the client, and that was not easy. Pop to the next slide. The next two slides we can just scroll through. They're just showing a bit more of the process. I'd say that I love incorporating all the bits of a building, like the fire hose bib, the thermostat, like the water station, the light switch covers, all that kind of stuff. Like sometimes clients think they need to remove all that stuff, but I think it shows the utilitarian needs of a space, and it forces the art to be a part of a functioning building. Have we lost the slides? We're 3 behind now.
Might just be taking a minute.
I'm talking too fast.
You're going through. So now in this brief break, let's get Kari a tape sponsor. So if anyone's watching, please
there we go.
do contact Kari if you would you like to offer her tape?
Dear Frog Tape, I love you, XO Kari. Okay, and here's my, actually that's my wife and my helper for that mural, Tara. She's helping me out on that mural on the back side of it. If we can do the next one as well. Yeah, and there we are. Look, there's the fire hose bib. But you know what? It's those little details that really make it in the end. And then the last slide. It's just going to show, I think, like there's a difference between interior and exterior murals. Interior murals you can play quite a bit with to achieve the 3-dimensionality. You can play with things like paint sheen and different types of paint and all, like different material altogether. But with the outdoor murals, you have to think quite a bit about external factors and longevity and things like that. But in this one, I did incorporate a dot mountain. And just to give people an idea of time, the entire mural took 2 weeks to do. And this dot mountain, which we're seeing a section of here, it took 2 people 8 hours.
Wow. I can't underemphasize the meticulous nature of your work. You have such attention to detail, like everything here from your planning process to the execution. I mean, it's amazing and how you've been able to transition the printmaking and the meticulous nature of your prints to such a large scale of a mural is really, it's fabulous.
I think
how I
that's
would
like,
put it.
it's like one thing that, I mean, maybe separates a printmaker muralist from a painter muralist is because printmakers are very methodical. Like everything is planned ahead of time. Like even if we think about color, like color for a printmaker is layered. So ahead of time, all of that has to be planned. So I take the same approach with the murals, and maybe that's just my personality, but it's, you know, it's definitely the printmaker doing a mural.
Totally.
It makes it really hard to find people to help you too, let me tell you.
I can imagine. That is this very specific skill set.
It's very
fortunate that you have a wife and a lovely partner who can I thought we could talk a little bit next about kind of the thread between connection and dialogue and storytelling through all of your visual artworks. Aimée, starting with you, you describe collage, and I thought this was very interesting, as a fitting medium for our current time, which is characterized by uncertainty and fragmentation. I feel like this is a very timely statement. How do you balance reflecting the state of your work and the world while also making space for the audience to come up with solutions and to be hopeful?
And I really appreciate this question, and I hope that my response it's going to be a gentle pushback to the question, just to give you
Please
fair
do.
warning. The reason that I want to gently push back on this question is because I don't actually think my work is about suggesting solutions. I don't see my role and the work that I do as something that is about proposing a singular way forward or a pathway that we should all be taking. I'm much more interested in my role as an artist and the work that I make in kind of cultivating a sense of curiosity. I really do see the possibility of collage as a kind of mirror. So rather than thinking that it has to be about like, this is how we could do it, everybody, this is what we could see, this is the future for us. I do think that the work operates as a kind of mirror of the world that we live in right now, that might help to reflect kind of our state of being or reflect questions that we hold. And I decided to show a couple of more like quite recent projects, just to show how some of this thinking is coming around. So this series is called Metaphoric Rocks. And it was actually built out of collage material that's geological in nature, and it's showing what are called metamorphic rock. And the reason that I'm switching over the title to be metaphoric rocks is because that is how my brain works. And I just automatically saw a great rock joke in it. But also part of the interest that I have in using collage material is to reflect a kind of awareness of place. And asking that question that I talked about earlier on of a sense of kinship. This work was made in residency while I was overseas in a place called Sankar in Scotland. And the geological surface that we were standing on and living on and working in is all what's geologically called metamorphic rock. And I guess part of what I'm interested in with this work that's sort of edging into spaces where it's maybe not exclusively collage based or 2D collage based is that I think it allows us to look at things that have been part of our visual culture, printed matter, books that we see, advertisement, things that have been around our visual awareness all the time, and to kind of pull them into a space where we might question them a little bit more. And we can maybe flip to the next project. I've also been working on a series of erasure drawings, and these appear almost as though they are painted. It comes from working with a lot of printed matter that's printed using offset lithographic technology. And this is where Kari and I get to have a little printmaker's high five, because I'm also a trained printmaker, and that's how I find I look at a lot of the world around me, is through an understanding of how the printed matter has come to be. And so knowing what I know about lithographic offset printmaking is that you can actually pull the ink away from the page because of how it sits on the surface. And so I've been going through this process where instead of cutting away, instead of forcibly removing something from the page surface, I'm actually going in and spending hours erasing. And it's kind of I think a kind of meditation on how we can consider ideas of shelter, issues that really come to the fore for me, like housing security, the land back movement. These are really important principles for me to be thinking about while I'm, especially in the place that I'm in. And I think some of this is pulling forward in the last project here too, also done in residency outside of Portugal in a place called Barreiro. This is a piece called Armoire. And Armoire was about taking the literal garbage that was outside the studio. All of this is made from things that people had either thrown away or were in the process of discarding, and using collage as a way of thinking through ideas of reuse and repair, and letting the work be a kind of mirror in terms of how we might consider our objects differently. These are 2 upturned chairs that have been retrofitted so that they become an armoire, a display cabinet. And I think, without going too deep into the symbology of the components, I'm really interested in taking the methodology of collage and having it address what I mentioned earlier when we were chatting, this idea of like anti-colonial practice. How can we bring things back to the spaces that they're from. And that's actually the destiny for Armoire, was to take it back into the space where I had found the material, where I had found the garbage that I was using, and to let it re-meet its home. And I think there's something in this practice that I'm really interested in that's also about letting the work go. And that, like, documenting the work, the making of the work, the dedication to process is really where the juice is for me. Yeah, and that, I think that's sort of how, rather than thinking about the work as a solution to something, I think I'm really in a place where I'm curious about how we can ask questions around it.
Thank you so much, Aimée. I really appreciate your response to that question and sharing it with us, your intention. I really feel like it speaks to you as an artist and how you approach your work. And also so interesting, removing the ink and using that as a way to cut out images. Something I personally have never thought of before, and really love to see that.
It's probably because your sane mind said, don't do it. It's too
Probably.
much. It's
Probably.
hours that you could use for some other destination.
But now my mind is going, that might be something to do. Jaime, sorry. What kind of dialogue were you hoping to foster amongst your viewers of the story we all just got to read? What were your intentions behind it?
I thought a lot about the first time I saw that question. I was like, I don't know how to answer this because I said before how a lot of what I make ends up being just a playful thing that it ends up sometimes in my sketching book. I'm having fun in the process and I let it go. Sometimes it has happened only a couple of times where the idea keeps evolving to the point that I have this need where I'm like, this needs to be a more elaborated thing and people need to see this, because seeing this would be the same thing as seeing me in a way. It's almost like going for connection. I would be going, like, I feel like by showcasing this and really almost like forcing it into people's eyes. Right now, like, the people get very distracted with their phones. There's like a lot of noise outside. I went from a position of like, if people grab my book and they kind of like eyeball it and then they keep going, that's fine. But during the Vancouver Art Book Fair, where I was showcasing it, after the fifth one, I was like, no. And I became a pain in the butt. I became a salesman. And I say, hey, come here. Do you want to hear a story? And the same way that I told you the story, I've been telling it so many times. And ultimately, what I was going for when I started to tell the story to people was, I want to connect with you through this story that means the world to me. That's how it felt when I made it. And that's why I can't just let people just pass by. There's a lot of debate here where at what point do I have to let people just read, if they just want to look at the book 3 pages and then say very nice and keep going, maybe I should let it be. And I wasn't that artist in that moment. I became very pushy, and I've been reading this story to kids as well. And to answer your question, what's been happening is that I've been connecting a lot, and that means a lot to me. It ultimately, I think that art is about connection, and that's what happened with Raligatio, the animated short, and it's what happened with this little book. When I read to kids, and they come with their own. Sometimes they come with their own story, and they correct me. No. What's happening here is this. I was like, oh, really? Tell me more. But something clicks in them. Something clicks that their eyes open up, pupils dilate, and they just, in that moment, they're seeing me. That's how I feel in that moment, that I'm being seen as an artist. So that would be the ultimate answer to your question is, I'm looking for connection and to be seen as an artist.
I love that answer. I think connection, I mean, stories, art, all of these things are about connecting with other people. And I think a wordless book, to me, seems like such a great tool because it does transcend language in so many different ways. And also people can bring their own thoughts and ideas, like the kid interrupting you saying that, no, that's not how the story goes. I think that's such a beautiful thing. And allowing that to flourish is wonderful. Kari, going back to stories of the community and creating dialogue, what kind of dialogue did you envision your mural starting in the community? Were you hoping anything to come out of it? I know that your work centers around environment and landscape. Were you hoping for that to be a point of dialogue with viewers? Was there any intention or hope behind what you created?
No, it's just nothingness and nothingness. We could, I'm talking, you can just scroll through the slides for this one, okay? I think, like, my work obviously is a love letter to the environment, and at no point in time in history, more than now, do we need people to appreciate that. So there's always that element in my work, however dreamscape or made up that landscape may be. But the dialogue that I'm hoping around this work, and the dialogue, I mean, I've already witnessed some of it. It begins while I'm working on the mural, while I'm out there taping, spray painting, sweating, and yes, maybe sometimes swearing a bit. I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm the interloper in someone else's community, and I'm not out there just as a representative of my own practice and my own reputation, which is very important, but also of the people who hired me. You don't want to be that muralist that was mean to someone, because then they'll never go eat at this pizza shop, right? So when the neighborhood folks are walking by or driving by and they stop to chat or comment, it's not only part of the gig for me, but it actually is a great portion of the gig, because I get to be part of that world for a little while. And how amazing is that? I don't go hang out where this mural is ever. I've never been there. I don't know if I'll go back, but like, it's far for someone from Vancouver. But so there's that part of communication, which begins this interaction with artwork, and anytime you can do that, it's amazing as an artist. The second part, in Vancouver, we're a little mural greedy. We're spoiled for them. But out in Surrey, this mural is, it's located in Morgan Crossing, and there aren't many, if any, murals that I saw at all. So the Guardians is a very generous gift to the neighborhood, and hopefully, more building owners will feel inclined to take the same approach. So there's all of that. And then, the other thing I want to say, I want people to look at it and think about what it is that it is, and why is it done in that style. And I want them to get to print. Full circle then, back, we're talking about me being a printmaker, because that's what I like to talk about the most. My passion for printmaking. Print is vanishing in the digital age, and the word print gets tossed around a lot to mean, quite often unimaginative reproduction. What I want people to see is the significance of print and printmaking and the technical skills involved. It's always back to printmaking with me, isn't it? For heaven's sakes.
Well, it's a big part of your process and who you are. And I think that's fabulous. I've really appreciated learning about all of your processes, and also just how it feels to me like you've all taken time for connection in your work, whether it be making space through a wordless book and letting someone interpret it, or connecting through collage in your work, and inspiring curiosity, and not saying this is the world, instead connecting with others and supporting ideation in that way, or through a mural and stopping and having that conversation with someone who is kindly being nosy and curious and wants to know what's happening in their community. I think that's so lovely, and such a big part of us as art makers and storytellers in Vancouver and beyond as we work. I just wanted to check the chat to see if we have any questions, and if not, doesn't look like it. I'm going to wrap up this panel of Talking Art just by thanking all of our artists who made it out this evening and took time of their day to chat with us. And also you, everyone who's lovely and in the audience who's joined us this evening and taken time out of your day. Just a reminder that the crawl will be taking place from November 14th to 17th. Over 500 artists are going to be opening up their studios to the public, including many of our panelists this evening. So mark your calendars and go to www.culturecrawl.ca to find all the artists and make sure to come visit them. On our website, you'll also find the other events leading up to the Culture Crawl, including our preview exhibition, which is showing over 90 artists across 4 venues, Pendulum, Strange Fellows, Alternative Creations, and the Cult. Join us for our opening reception tomorrow, November 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. at all venues. Have a wonderful night, and thank you again to all of our speakers.
Thanks,
So much.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.